To aid in our exploration of the 3ds Max tools, I'm providing this scene of a courtyard. We can use it to practice transforming objects, and that's moving, rotating, and scaling. If you don't have the exercise files, then you can just create a few primitives and use those to practice the transforms. Also, when you open this scene file for the first time, don't be alarmed if you see a bunch of checker patterns on the objects. That's just the materials being compiled for display in the viewport. It only takes a few seconds, and it will only happen once. The transform tools are on the main toolbar. We have Move, Rotate, and Scale. First, let's look at positioning or translating objects. We can choose the Select and Move tool, and then click on an object in any viewport. I'll go down to the perspective view, and as I hover my mouse around an object, I get selection highlighting in yellow. When I click on that object, it becomes highlighted in blue, and I see the Move gizmo superimposed. In this scene, I've frozen most of the geometry. In other words, I've made it impossible to select anything except for the furniture. We'll look at how to freeze and unfreeze objects later in the course, but for now, let's just take a look at how to position objects. With the Move tool active and an object selected, we see the Move gizmo. It's color-coded to the coordinate axes. Red, green, and blue correspond to X, Y, and Z, respectively. In the top, left, and front views, I can move objects in the space of the viewport itself. These are 2D orthographic viewports, meaning that they don't indicate depth. And we can move an object in an ortho view to move it in only 2 dimensions. I can go up to the top view and right-click in that view so I don't lose my selection, and I can move it in X or Y in world space, but in the top view I cannot change the elevation of the objects. But of course I can do that in the perspective view. I can go over to perspective, right-click there, and click and drag on the Z axis in order to move that object up or down. I'll undo that with Control-Z. Additionally, in any viewport, I can move an object in 2 axes at once because the Move gizmo has 3 little brackets that correspond to the 3 planes of Cartesian coordinate space. And I can make that a little bit easier to see by enlarging the gizmo. There's a keyboard shortcut for that, which is the equal sign key, and press that repeatedly to make the gizmo larger. So these are the 3 brackets. And if I want to move my object only in X and Y and not in Z, I can click on the X, Y bracket and move the object around. I'll undo that with Control-Z, and I'll make that gizmo smaller again. The keyboard shortcut for that is the dash key on the alpha keyboard, not to be confused with the minus sign on the numeric keyboard. Press the dash key a few times to reduce the size of the transform gizmo. We can find out numerical information about the current transform, such as Move, either in the Transform Type-In area down here at the bottom of the screen, or in a dedicated window. With the Move tool active, we see the position of the selected object. The values are displayed relative to the current reference coordinate system, which is chosen up here. Again, we'll talk more about that later. This object doesn't have any parent. It's not linked to anything. And in the default view coordinate system up here, the position values are going to be displayed in absolute world space relative to the world's origin or center. So if I wanted to move this object to exactly, for example, 450 centimeters in world space, I could plug that in the y-axis here. I could just type in 450 and press enter. If you need more information, then you can open up a dedicated window by right-clicking on the appropriate transform tool. I'll right-click on Select and Move, and I get the Transform Type-In dialog. And this is helpful because it not only displays the transform information, but it also tells us what our current reference point is. We see that we're working in absolute world space. And we can plug in values here as well. We can click and drag on the spinner, for example, and that'll move the object. Or if I move the object interactively in the viewport, these numbers will update as well. There's also an offset mode, which can be helpful if you need to move an object by a particular amount in a certain direction. For example, I can say Move the object 100 centimeters in X, and it will move 100 centimeters in X. Or if I want to move it back, I can set that to -100 and send it back where it was. And that's the basics of the Select and Move tool.